A Melody of the Heart. Written by Star Origin. Narrated by Wade Baser. Prologue. Following the Changeling invasion in Canterlot 2 weeks ago, the security around Canterlot had been heavily fortified. The Royal Guard even went as far as to recruit soldiers from the surrounding towns of Equestria. They were picky about who they chose, though, and mostly went after ponies that were already skilled at maintaining peace, such as nightclub bouncers or security guards. Among those ponies was Starblaze, a white-coated unicorn that used to be head of security at a laboratory located in Manhattan. He was never the best magician, and he was a bit messy too. His orange mane was untidy, and strands of orange hair stuck to his fur after a day spent in Canterlot patrolling in search of any anomaly. The only issue was that if foals decided to pull a prank on him, he would technically have to give chase until he caught up with them. He usually managed to find the troublemakers, but after a while, the original trio had told other foals about him. His days since then were even more hectic than before. That aside, while his facial expression reeked of fatigue and depression, his musculature wasn't all that bad. He doubted he would ever be qualified to star in some mature magazines sold across Equestria, but his physical attributes weren't that bad when compared to some of the other ponies waiting on the train. To be fair, he was built a lot more physically than most of the ponies around him. Of course, having been trained as a guard since he left high school had helped him a lot, and ever since the death of his parents when he was still in high school, he had needed to pick some jobs to keep himself alive and to pay for his educational bills. That alone had given him a strong and stable personality, but also strengthened his social abilities in the sense that he needed to adapt to them to survive. Many other races thought that Equestria was a haven compared to the other kingdoms around the globe, but in fact it was just as cruel economically to ponies as to anyone else. The only advantage ponies had over some others was that they had the princess to keep wars and internal conflicts at bay. Starblaze's gaze was slowly directed on the floor of the train platform. The floor, made up of bricks like most of Canterlot, was colored with a monotonous white. It wouldn't have been that bad if only the floor were like this, but the entire train station was built that way. All the walls were white, and in only 2 weeks, Starblaze had already gotten annoyed by the monotony of the capital. It was a majestic city in his opinion. The main complaint he had about Canterlot was that it was too monotonous for his taste, and even after he had gotten used to Canterlot, the color scheme of the town still made him cringe a bit on the inside. While Starblaze was lost in his thoughts, he had completely ignored the stallion that had just called him from afar. His ears had perked up, but he ignored them and resumed his train of thought. The other pony had to tap on Star's shoulder to finally have his presence acknowledged. Starblaze jumped a bit and instinctively took a few steps backwards. He looked up to find who or what had startled him. He was not a bit surprised when he saw a stallion with a golden coat and a dark blue mane. The Pegasus in front of him snickered and put a hoof over his mouth in an attempt to remain respectful towards the white unicorn, but failed. "Oh, you should see the look on your face right now, Blazy," the Pegasus exclaimed through several bursts of laughter. "It's priceless." "Shut it, Flash. I'm not in the mood. I had to chase down kids again today, and I'm not exactly amused by how they constantly keep doing this every single day. Plus, my body feels sore, and I'm so tired right now. The last thing I need is an annoying pest shadowing me all the time." "Don't be like that, Blazy," Flash replied. The coldness contained in Star's voice had managed to make the Pegasus pout. "I was just kidding around." The unicorn continued to glare. Not in the mood, Sentry. Unless you have a question of some importance, please leave me be for the moment. I've always wondered what your cutie mark meant. Can you tell me exactly what it represents? Flash Sentry asked with a grin on his lips. Why do you care? Star replied emotionlessly. Isn't it what friends normally ask to get to know their friends? Starblaze groaned at his reply, and then let out a long sigh. He took a deep breath and said, If you must know, I used to be good with fire magic before the death of my parents, and since then, I've been unable to summon my fire magic. According to the doctors, it could be due to PTSD. I can't be sure myself, but I do know I've lost the ability I used to have with fire magic, so this cutie mark isn't accurate anymore. Well, that's no fun, Flash said. I would have liked to see you use some fire magic. If I could use my old magic, you'd be the first one I'd test it on, believe me, Star said, with a grin, and let out a snicker. Seriously? Flash let out in an overreacting manner as if he was hurt. I thought I meant more to you than just a target. Don't worry, friend. You're not just a normal target. You're a moving target. And I do love a moving target every once in a while. Jerk. Starblaze shrugged and continued the conversation. They talked about this and that while Star waited for his train. They both still wore their Royal Guard attire, armor and all. But now that they were done with their day, they had taken off their helmets. The bulges in their saddlebag attested to that. Soon enough, Starblaze bid Flash Sentry goodbye as he saw his train enter the station. Star wasted no time in boarding the train once it had stopped at the platform, and showing his ticket to the train conductor. Once he had been given the green light, he moved to his usual spot in the passenger wagon he boarded and peacefully sat down to look out the window and wait for the train to finish boarding and depart. He was eager to return home. After all, who wouldn't look forward to their only weekend off in the month? He could also count himself lucky they never asked him for night shifts on top of all the hours he already did weekly. Some guards didn't have his luck. There would be a lot for him to catch up when he arrived at Manhattan's train station. Once the train had reached its destination, Starblaze took his belongings and walked out onto the boarding platform of Manhattan. He looked up at the clock in the station and saw the time. It was 6 p.m. His eyes widened, and the realization hit him with full force. He was late. Without wasting a second, he bolted off, climbed the stairs, and ran as fast as his legs could carry him through the streets of Manhattan. The sole question he asked himself was why had he agreed to work late? 10 minutes had passed before he reached his second destination, and Starblaze was heavily panting. His throat was sore from all the running he had done, and trails of sweat stained the fur around his face. He took a few minutes to calm himself and to regain his stature before he entered the building in front of him, the Manhattan Elementary School. The white stallion walked to the secretariat and stood at the front desk. The secretary, a red unicorn with an orange mane, never raised her head, but her ears perked up upon hearing the sound of Star's hooves on the ceramic floor. The clang his armor produced each time it took a step didn't lend itself to silence. Sorry, but whatever business you have right now will have to wait until tomorrow. That's not going to be an issue right now, ma'am. I'm here to pick up Melody, Star replied with a warm smile, hoping he could get the mayor's attention. As if on cue, the secretary looked up at Starblaze with a surprised look on her face. Thank goodness! I was beginning to wonder what I would do with the poor thing. She was constantly saying that her brother would come and pick her up. Couldn't you have just asked your parents to pick her up instead? Star's gaze quickly dropped. and he heaved a heavy sigh, averting his eyes from the secretary. As if on cue, her pupils dilated and she gasped, raising a hoof to cover her mouth. "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I'm so sorry." Star just shook his head and managed to lift his head up and stare in the mayor's hazel eyes. Silence fell between them, and both looked at each other, their eyes shuffling around the room in the hopes that the other would break this pregnant silence. Finally, Star shrugged, having regained his composure. "So, do you think I could take Melody home now?" The mayor followed with a nod of her own, and she got up from her chair in a flash. She grabbed the key and kicked her chair back in front of her desk. With a small gesture of her hoof, the mayor led Starblaze to the back of her office, while he followed closely behind, and quickly found a white filly with a green mane and a tail asleep on the chair in a large room with a single round table. Probably the meeting room, or something close to that, Starblaze thought. The stallion wasted no time in igniting his horn and grabbing the filly in his telekinetic hold. After he had made sure Melody was secured on his back and comfortable, the unicorn thanked the secretary, made his way out of the school, and began walking home. The road wasn't long or complicated because, although he lived on the western outskirts, whereas the elementary school was located to the east, there were few obstacles between the two. And besides, the streets were starting to empty as time went by them. When Starblaze arrived home, the night was beginning to settle in, and the streets had emptied themselves as per usual. He unlocked his door using the key he put in his saddlebags when he left for Canterlot in the morning. Once it was closed behind him, he flicked the lights open with his magic, and walked upstairs with the filly still on his back. Despite the fact he constantly said it was just a typical house, Starblaze couldn't deny that mahogany cost a lot to buy. His economic situation wasn't the best with the house, and when Melody was still just a foal, it was common for him to be left without any money after paying his bills. Nowadays, with the salary he earned, he was able to keep up with the taxes and all the other bills that needed to be taken care of, but he still considered himself far from rich. Star switched on the lights upstairs and was welcomed by the green walls of the second floor. Only the main room of the second floor bore that color. Melody's room had also been painted green, but for reasons other than the coloration of her mane and tail. Oddly enough, she requested for her bedroom to be painted green because of changelings. Instead of being afraid of changelings, and the rumors running around them since their failed invasion 2 weeks ago, Melody was a big fan of them. She had even called them cute and awesome in her class. Following that, they had summoned Starblaze at the school to discuss her behavior and the family's background, to have a better understanding of the filly out of concern for her. Despite that, Melody had asked her brother if they could paint their room green and make it changeling theme. Truly, Starblaze was jealous of her sister's innocence. He tucked her in bed and headed to his room, ready to call it a night himself. The day had been rough on him, and all he had wished for was a good night's rest. He entered his room without turning the lights on, and unfastened his armor straps with his magic. With that out of the way, he grabbed his armor and stored it inside of the dresser in the back of his room. Once that had been done, he headed over to where his bed was instinctively, and found his way under the blankets. It did not take long for him to fall prey to slumber once he laid his head on the pillow. The next morning, Star was roused from his sleep by the joyful laughter of his sister, who was currently jumping all over his bed with the biggest of smiles on her face. Melody? What are you doing? I'm trying to sleep here.
You've had enough sleep for this morning,
Melody exclaimed defiantly.
You promised you'd come and play with me in the meadows of Niagara Falls.
Give me a few minutes and I'll be out of bed, Melody.
Yay!
Melody's happy shout alongside the hug she gave her brother made his heart melt. Melody Swiftsong, or simply Melody, could barely keep her eagerness and joy to herself. Her jumps were ecstatic with anticipation, and she hummed a soft tune as she danced around the living room downstairs. It was only after a cup of coffee that he remembered the promise he had made to his sister the week before. Now fully awake, Star began packing the necessary food for their trip to Niagara Falls, and asked Melody if she had decided on what she wanted to eat for the day while they would be gone.
I don't mind having whatever it is you're having, big bro,
Melody chimed playfully. Her golden eyes didn't help Star's case in finding her demeanor adorable. She just continued to jump around the living room as Star was preparing the last of their supplies. Starblaze made a mental list of what he was to bring as he looked at the content that lay inside the basket. There were 2 daisy sandwiches, a few apples, and 2 bottles of fresh apple juice, still sealed tight, along with some cheese. The stallion closed the lid of the basket when he confirmed that he had everything he wanted to bring. He ignited his horn, grabbed the basket's handle with his telekinetic hold, and moved it behind his head to gently place it on his back. After that was done, the stallion grabbed 2 pieces of rope and steadied the basket on his back so it wouldn't fall off when making his way to Niagara Falls. "Melody?" the stallion called out to be sure the filly could hear him. She had a nasty habit of being oblivious to everyone around her once excited.
Yes?
Melody replied back in a sweet chime. A few seconds later, her head appeared in the framing of the hallway leading to the front door.
Are we ready to go now?
Indeed we are, little one, Starblaze told her with a soft smile.
Yay! We're going on an adventure!
The little filly ran through the hallway and stopped right next to her brother before giving him another grin. That filly loves to make my heart melt, Star thought as he opened the door.